Right now on Breaking Down the News, a controversial decision decides the winner of the Kentucky Derby. We're breaking down the call, the controversy, and what happens next. Breaking Down the News at 6:30 starts right now. Without a doubt, definitely a Kentucky Derby for the history books, one we will never forget. Good evening, I'm Sam Dick. This is Breaking Down the News on the CW Lexington. We'll have in-depth coverage from a number of different angles and people of this controversial decision in just a minute. But first, let's talk about today's beautiful weather. Nothing controversial, Chris Bailey, about that.
No,
you used to be riding the high life here, man. You're like the,
you know what?
You're it. You're the man.
Listen, though, I spent part of Oaks Day and part of Derby Day being on the low life.
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
because of the rain. We set you up for the rain.
We brought you back from the dead.
I know, right? And on a day like this, hard to come into work, isn't it?
I know.
You did a little fishing today, didn't you?
I did. I caught some crappie and some bluegill and some bass over at Willisburg Lake.
So you did well.
I had some help. I had somebody help me. That's the key.
Always good to have.
But the weather was perfect. Very little wind.
Yeah.
Warm but not hot.
And the fish are biting.
Yes.
That's a sign that we're getting deeper into spring, my man. And here we are on a day like this with that blue sky over top of downtown Lexington. If you love a good sunset, and according to my Twitter feed, a lot of folks love a good sunset, you're going to get some of those ice crystal clouds to show up on the western horizon. Should make for a little fiery sunset. Current temperatures into the 70s. Most areas out this evening. We'll drop it through the 60s. By the time 11 o'clock rolls around, 60 to 65. Some upper 50s will likely show up during that time as well. Say hello to Defender Radar Network, but nothing really out there. I did put the satellite in here to show you some clouds that are to our west. No precipitation coming from those clouds. That is a sign, though, of things to come. Severe weather lurking across parts of the Plain States. Got severe weather into Kansas here as one low pressure cruises toward the Missouri area. Bigger system is going to eject out of the desert southwest, and it's going to roll across the country the next few days. Out ahead of this, it's warm tomorrow into Wednesday. We are into the low 80s on Wednesday. Could be right at 80 tomorrow. Late week severe weather threat. Could get some storms into town as early as Wednesday. I mean, there's a teeny tiny chance tomorrow, a little better chance for a scattered storm on Wednesday, but we'll focus on the Thursday severe weather threat, and the weekend that follows, Sam, may turn a little cooler and wetter. I know you've heard that one a time or two.
Just a time or two. Thank you, Chris. Today, we're going in depth into this weekend's Kentucky Derby. Of course, it ended in controversy after the horse that crossed the finish line first, Maximum Security, was disqualified, making the horse that finished second, a real long shot, the winner. An appeal filed this afternoon by the owner of Maximum Security has already been denied. WKYT's Garrett Weimer is looking into the controversial decision. He begins our top story coverage on Breaking Down the News.
Yes, we live in the horse capital of the world, but those who work in the industry say folks everywhere are still talking about the Kentucky Derby.
When you take a favorite and you replace it with the longest shot in the field, you're going to get people who are upset, and that's exactly what happened. Is he backed up?
The president of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, headquartered here in Lexington, says the stewards made the right call, enforcing the same rules they enforce every day, but he also understands the controversy. Now that'll continue for who knows how long. Barry Stills, a Lexington attorney representing the owners of Maximum Security, has filed an appeal with the State Horse Racing Commission. We're told that appeal was denied within hours of being filed. Even if they take further legal steps, the NTRA president believes the decision will stand.
From my perspective, from everything I've seen, this was the right call. It was handled well, and it should hold up.
Until the matter is settled, though, Stills also wants a stay to prevent the purse money from being paid out. It's a process that, in all, owner Gary West said earlier could take months, if not years. In Lexington, Garrett Weimer, WKYT.
And Garrett joins me now. We just learned, Garrett, in the last hour that Maximum Security's appeal was denied. What was the reason they're giving for denying this appeal?
Well, the letter from the commission spells out that they can't appeal because state horse racing rules just simply don't allow it. And I should say this is something that industry insiders and experts that I've talked to over the past couple of days certainly saw this coming because those rules say that specifically that in-race fouls cannot be appealed. So the commission's director never responded to my request for comment today, but he had told Blood Horse over the weekend that he was going to defer to attorneys whether or not this could be appealed, and obviously this is their answer.
So is this over and done now at this point? Do we know?
Well, I've reached back out to Barry Stills. He's the Lexington attorney who is representing the West family who owns Maximum Security. And in the past half hour, I haven't heard back. Obviously, dealing with this, he's pretty busy. But
Sure.
Likely this isn't over yet. Experts say they could take this to an outside court, although that also they say is not likely to succeed because the National Thoroughbred Racing Association president who I talked to today said that hasn't worked in the past. And besides, most in the industry are also seeming to agree that the steward's decision was the right call anyway.
We're really covering a lot of ground here and nationally as well on a subject I think most people didn't even know. They didn't know that stewards existed or lanes existed and fouls. And so if nothing else, we're getting some information that maybe a lot of us didn't understand, and you're providing some of it now with this appeal process.
Exactly, and that's something that the NTRA and some of the other experts that I've talked to say this is something that, while right now is kind of a negative for the sport, could eventually turn into a positive because a lot of more casual fans are learning things and being exposed to things that they really just had no idea about before all this.
On the Monday after the Derby, it's still a very important story.
Very much so.
All right. Thank you, Garrett.
Thanks, Sam.
Equine lawyer Joel Turner has been on both sides of cases for more than 3 decades with this, and he says the stewards made the right choice based on what he's seen.
I've reviewed the tape in slow motion, and to the extent that I've been afforded a view of the tape, I believe there was an infraction of the rules. And I believe the steward's decision was based on sound factual analysis. It wasn't perfect. I understand they didn't talk to Tyler Gaffleone, who was on War of Will, and I can't understand why they wouldn't, because he was the jock that was in the closest proximity and who was offended by the foul that was perpetrated by the rider and Maximum Security.
Controversy is rare, actually, at the Kentucky Derby. In its 145th year, history there has only been 6 races with jockey objections and only 3 horses actually disqualified. The first objection was in 1880, then again in 1933, and then in 1959. Now, none of those results was overturned. In 1968, though, Dancer's Image finished first in the Derby, but then a few days later was disqualified for using a banned medication. In 1984, the Derby's 4th place finisher was disqualified after a jockey's objection. In 2001, jockey's objection failed, and then this year's Derby was the first time ever that a jockey's objection led to the disqualification of a horse that crossed the finish line first at the Derby. It had never happened before until now. Hall of Fame trainer Bob Baffert, he's weighing in on what happened Saturday with this controversial call, and he's not holding back. Baffert told Sports Illustrated's Tim Layden, quote, "No one ever calls an objection in the Derby. It's always a roughly run race. I have been wiped out numerous times, but this is the Derby. I can see by the book why they did it, but sometimes you've got to take your tail kickings with dignity." And by the way, he used a different word, though, for tail. Baffert also went on to say, quote, "One thing that got lost in all of this is Maximum Security is the real deal. He's the best 3-year-old in the country." That's Bob Baffert. Dick Gabriel joins us now to talk about Saturday in the Kentucky Derby and what happened. You've been around horse racing a lot of your life.
Yeah.
Decades.
Yep.
Your perspective on what happened Saturday when they disqualified, at that point, the winning horse.
Well, first of all, I was surprised because obviously this has never happened in the Kentucky Derby. It could have happened back in 01. There was a foul claim down the stretch against Monarchos, but it was not held up, obviously. But going back and looking at the video, I was convinced, and still am, that it was the right thing to do. There's been so much talk lately, and rightly so, about the safety of the horses and the riders. And this is why these rules exist, to protect both horse and rider. And what might have happened in that race, I mean, it was frighteningly close to being a disaster. So I don't think they were doing it to be politically correct. They did it because it was the right thing to do per the rules of the game. Bill Mott said it the best, the guy who ended up winning the race is the trainer. He said, if this is a claiming race on Tuesday, the number comes down in 5 minutes, and he was absolutely right.
So what happens what was the infraction? I guess that's the point I want to make here, because the maximum security was in, they say, lane 2.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that you're supposed to stay in that path if you have horses next to you, right?
Correct.
And they were bunched up coming around that turn.
Correct. You're in a lane. It's not like it's marked off or anything, but wherever you are, that's your lane. Somebody can't cut in front of you, but you can't cut in front of somebody else. He got in a little bit of trouble, and he impeded 2 other horses, and that's the way the rule is written. If you impede other horses, and it's your fault. If you are caused by another horse to impede another horse, that's not your fault. But he did that. Now, what's squirrely about this is he did not impede Country House, but Country House benefited, obviously, from the fact that his number was taken down. But the 2 horses that were behind him that were cut off, including War of Will, at that point had no chance of winning the Kentucky Derby from that point forward, and that's what matters.
Any thought on going forward, how this affects horse racing at this level, derbies in the future? I mean, now everybody's going to be thinking about, well, in the Kentucky Derby in 2019,
yeah, I think you're going to have the horse players who are fans for one weekend out of the year kind of tuned in on that kind of thing and wondering, well, why wasn't that a foul and that sort of stuff. But people who go to the races, a few times a year or more realize they've seen it before. Some people have held winning tickets that have been taken down and vice versa. My own wife benefited. She had a winning ticket on Country House.
Lucky her.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think they'll be a little more cognizant of it, but the notion that they shouldn't have called this because it's a Kentucky Derby, that's just wrong.
Dick Gabriel, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And you can join the conversation by leaving your comments on WKYT.com or on our Facebook page. Let us know what you think. Next on Breaking Down the News, a surprise for a Lincoln County 6th grader. We'll explain this emotional video in about 3 minutes.
WKYT News is brought to you by Kentucky Lottery.